Hi, I'm Jammeh, and I'm in Fatu right now. I always choose AfriCell's 4G network because it has the widest coverage and the fastest speeds. Let me show you why I always choose AfriCell's 4G.
Mr. Tambadou, thank you for granting us this interview.
It's my pleasure.
It has been a year since the government came to power, and most Gambians agree that the justice was largely absent in the previous governments. So what has been the most significant achievements of your ministry?
Well, we have had a lot of positive things to report. For the sake of time, I will just highlight some of the key achievements. But I think before discussing the achievements, we need to understand the context that we're coming from in terms of the progress, vis-a-vis the progress that we have made. Because you can't measure the significant milestones in a vacuum. It has to be done within a context. And I think we all agree that the human rights situation in the country over the past 22 years has been terrible. We all know that the rule of law and the administration of justice system in the country was almost non-existent. It was a one-man rule who loomed large over all institutions of our administration of justice system. That has changed significantly. Okay. The starting point for me is the need to indigenize our judiciary. We have done that over the past 1 year. His Excellency the President has appointed 12 judicial officers to the superior courts of the Gambia. These, I have to say, include women as well. There have been 5 female judges who've been appointed. But also for the, in our Court of Appeal, we now have, out of the 7 judges of the newly reconstituted Court of Appeal, we now have 4 female judges. And for the first time in the history of this country, we have a fully constituted Supreme Court bench of exclusively of Gambian judges. And then also for the first time in the history of this country, we have got the first female Gambian justice of the Supreme Court. So I think these are positive, landmark, significant milestones, and it's just the first step to rebuilding a resilient judicial architecture that will be anchored strongly upon respect for the rule of law. So the judiciary is one aspect of institutions that we are identifying. We have, in the course of this 1 year, allowed the democratic space to grow, and journalists, Gambians in general, can freely express themselves. We now see radio stations in the country that had never entertained political discussions, debates, now have programs where they open telephone lines for the public to phone in and express their views about government's programs and policies. I think that's an improvement. We no longer have arbitrary arrests have significantly reduced. There are no longer reports of torture or disappearance or murder. We have established a National Human Rights Commission within this first 1 year. We are in the process of identifying the membership of this commission. We have established a Constitutional Review Commission to consult Gambians in and outside the country and draft a new constitution which will usher in a third republic. We have established the legal framework for the setting up of the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, which is very, very important, because I think some people misunderstand the purpose of truth commissions. But really, our objective in the case of the Gambia, perhaps let me even start by saying that we're not copying and pasting from other jurisdictions. That is why we went on a few study tours. We have conducted research on truth commissions, and whatever lessons we learned from outside, we have adapted to our own particular circumstances here in the Gambia we have considered our social, our political, our cultural, our religious context in crafting a commission that will be fit for the purpose here in the Gambia. So the idea is to investigate, first and foremost, the human rights abuses that have occurred in this country over the past 22 years. We all want to know the truth. The victims' families want to know the truth. Those who've been disappeared, we want to find out what happened to them, who disappeared them, what was the reason, where they've been disappeared to. These are all questions that I think will help bring closure for not just the victims, but also the perpetrators. But the overriding objective of our Truth Commission is to learn lessons about how we got to this point in the first place, so that we can put in place mechanisms to prevent recurrence, because we hold dear the idea of never again. And we want to ensure that what has happened here over the past 22 years will never occur to any Gambian again. So to cut this response short, this is in general some of the key milestones we have had. We have, again, perhaps I'll add the fact that we have reviewed numerous cases. We have, over the course of this 1 year, reviewed a total of 241 cases. We have discontinued prosecutions in 36 cases involving 86 accused persons on the basis of insufficient evidence. And we are trying to, in the process as well, create a systematic approach to dealing with these governance and justice-related issues.
Like now, moving on to what has been the challenges your ministry has faced over since you took over?
Oh, the challenges have been, the challenges far outweigh the progress that we have made, and the challenges continue from material, financial resources to human resources. We have embarked upon a reform process that is very demanding. We have approached our work in two ways. There is the ad hoc reform process that is part of the transitional justice project that we have embarked upon, and that is very demanding. It requires a whole ministry of itself. And there is also the continuing work of the ministry in terms of its day-to-day activities, which continues in any event and will far outlive our transitional justice process. So these are the two main parallel processes that we are involved in at the ministry. Now, I have said over and over, I have described over and over our challenges, but we are getting there. There's no gain describing some of these challenges, because I think everyone knows these, everyone knows them. But we are doing our best, we are doing our bit. The idea really is to be able to build capacity at the ministry, at both the vertical and horizontal levels. We need to strengthen existing capacity at the ministry by providing training to council. We handle very important legal matters for and on behalf of the Gambian state that requires expertise in many international law areas, particularly international law and international commercial areas, and that requires a lot of experience and expertise, which we don't have at the level of the ministry. So council at the ministry need to be trained and provided with the requisite equipment to be able to handle sufficiently, adequately, on behalf of the state, these work. Now, in terms of the need to also strengthen the ministry's capacity, I think we need to be able to attract more Gambians, more experienced Gambians from the private bar. Now, you can't be successful in that all the time. You have to have certain things in place to be able to attract more lawyers from the private bar. So the conditions of service must be improved at the ministry if we are to succeed in attracting more members from the private bar to come and assist us in this very important phase of the country's political evolution. It's a very demanding phase. It's a very challenging phase. We need as much assistance as we can get, but our preference is to have this process owned, localized by Gambians here in this country. I think we have the capacity. We are showing in different ways by the judicial appointments, by the establishment of the Commission of Inquiry that is investigating the financial dealings of the former president, which are all Gambians really in these processes. So we have the capacity, we have the human resources. What we need is to encourage greater participation by Gambians.
Now, what are some of the reforms, or let me put it this way, what are some of the reforms that you as an ordinary Gambian, not in your capacity as a minister, would like to see change in the constitution?
Well, we are in the process, as I said, of establishing the commission. Incidentally, they will be sworn in tomorrow, Monday, by His Excellency the President. Okay. And I think I share these reforms with His Excellency the President. And foremost, of course, is the need to have in our constitution a 2-term limit for the president. I think that is absolutely key in building a solid foundation for our democracy. We want to have a system of governance that is based on the highest standards of democratic values and norms around the country. And I believe having a 2-term limit for the president is an important aspect. Of course, the idea of enfranchising Gambians to vote. We do not just want to recognize this right. We want the government to have an obligation to facilitate the exercise of this right. And I think these are some of the key reforms that I envisage will be reflected in a new constitution. But you know, I am sure the government will come up with its set of reform proposals that it will submit to the Constitutional Review Commission for their consideration as part of their consultations with the Gambian people.
It seems like the presidential term limit is not a priority. So why do you think it was not a prioritized like of the president as of the age limit, presidential age limit?
Well, you see, there is a we rejected the idea of a piecemeal amendment of the Constitution. And that is why in May last year, we hosted a conference of 500 participants from a cross-section of Gambian society, from civil society organizations, from professional associations, from members of the National Assembly, women's groups, youth groups, religious communities. And the consensus at that conference was that we need a new constitution to reflect accurately and faithfully the aspirations of the Gambian people. Now, having said that, and while we are establishing the process of drafting a new constitution, we can't also have our hands tied by the provisions, by the existing provisions in the 1997 Constitution. And so therefore, whenever the absolute need arises to amend the Constitution, we will do so in order to help facilitate our governance environment. And that is the approach we have taken, and that is why I believe we have amended the Constitution on 2 or 3 occasions, including removing the upper age limit for the presidency. And allow me to state for the record as well that the reason why we amended the upper age limit for the presidency was not, again, I will underscore this, was not to allow for the appointment of Her Excellency the Vice President. The idea was to allow for the appointment of Gambians to the Supreme Court of the Gambia. There were 2 justices of the Supreme Court who were removed from their positions by former President Jammeh, and they had reached the constitutional retirement age of 70, and we thought they needed to be reinstated back to their positions in the Supreme Court. And because of this age barrier, it was decided to amend the upper age limit for judicial appointments to allow for the reinstatement of these two justices, of these two Gambian justices of the Supreme Court. Now, in the process, we also looked at other provisions in the Constitution and made a determination that if we limit it to the judicial sector, that in itself may be a discriminatory act. So we decided to include the amendment to the upper age limit of the president, but it wasn't as a result of giving priority to that amendment over the presidential two-term limit. And in any event, what purpose will that serve now to amend the to include a two-term limit for the presidency when the next presidential elections are a few years away? We still have time. So really, we adopted the approach to look at priority areas for amendment in the Constitution, and that is why we have not done it as much. We have, I think, amended the Constitution 2 or 3 times at most over the past year and a half, and that is the approach, I think, that has shown the commitment of this government to a wholesale, a holistic approach to reforms.
Now, staying on the subject, President Barrow and the coalition promise or agree that they will serve only 3 years, but now we have had people, including the UDP leader, Usainu Dabo, saying that Barrow should serve 5 years. For the sake of integrity, what will you advise the president on this matter? Should he stick to the promise or should he stay for 5 years?
If the president seeks my advice on this matter, I will give my sincere advice.
And what is that sincere advice?
Well, the president has not yet sought my advice, so I can't really say what that advice is.
Now, what would you advise the president? 3 years or 5 years?
If the president seeks my advice on that question, I'll give him my sincere advice.
Now, for the interest of the audience and a layman like me, if you are to advise the president on this issue, would you tell him to go for 3 years or 5 years?
I will advise the president when he seeks my advice.
Why are you reluctant? Why so tightly we don't want to talk about
because
this?
The president has not sought my advice on this matter yet, and to sit here in an interview and say if the president were to ask me, this is what I would tell him, it's basically putting the cart before the horse. I don't want to do that. My advice, my role is, as I am the principal legal advisor to the government, so my advice is to the government, and the president is the head of the government. So my advice will be to the president on this matter. But I know it's a very live issue. It's been debated across the country. There are, of course, legal as well as constitutional, moral, ethical issues around it. And some are a matter of law, and others are a matter of integrity and character. I wouldn't want to get myself involved in that debate. It's a debate of politicians. I want it to remain so. I am not a politician.
You are not a politician.
Well, I'm not a partisan politician.
Partisan politician.
Yes.
Sure. If I come to you today and said, Mr. Minister, should President Barrow serve 3 or 5 years, what will be your response to me?
It's a difficult question for me, really, as I said. And I think my earlier response is sufficient. If you read between the lines, I have said the issue of whether it's going to be 3 years or 5 years revolves around legal, constitutional, ethical, moral issues, and these are issues that are both legal and personal, and I wouldn't want to make the choice for anyone. But if my advice is sought, I will give it genuinely, sincerely, and frankly.
Right. Are there any plans to have former President Jammeh extradited back to the Gambia to face trial or to face the International Tribunal?
At this point, the priority of this government, as I always said, is to establish the truth and to ensure that what has happened here over the past 22 years will no longer happen. We do not want another President Jammeh type of leader in this country. And I think that should be the preoccupation of all Gambians at this moment in time. It's a question of timing, I think, more than anything else. And I do understand perfectly the impatience and the urge and the request of the victims and their families to see justice. But I keep saying that it's a question of defining what justice is. For some people, they want retributive justice. They want people who have committed crimes to be arrested, to be prosecuted, to be imprisoned. Others want restorative justice. Some victims are content with a mere public apology by their tormentors. Other victims are content with reparations. So different victims have different needs for justice, and our process, the transitional justice process that we are engaged in, is to cater for all categories of victims.
We all heard a lot about the Truth Reconciliation Commission being set up. Some Gambians said it will be a long drawn out process that will take up a lot of resources which could have gone somewhere. Some said they prefer justice served instead of the TRRC trial or justice through the court system.
And that's what I think my last response answers that partly. What is justice? Is justice only retributive justice? Is it only about prosecuting people and locking them up in prison? Or is it about restorative justice? Do all the victims want the same thing? As I said, certainly some want their tormentors to be imprisoned, to be prosecuted. And others are content with a mere apology and reparations, compensation for the pain that they have suffered. So I think we are trying to cater for all categories of victims, and we should not assume that all the victims want all the perpetrators to be imprisoned. That's one. Now, in terms of the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, well, I think it's an important process. I think it's an investment that will pay dividends in the future. If I were to spend a lot of money to ensure that we do not ever go through what we have gone through here over the past 22 years, I will, without blinking an eye, because it's an investment that is perhaps the most worthy of all investments. Because if we slide back into the kind of governance environment which we lived through under Jammeh, then it's a non-starter. You can't even have the conducive atmosphere to start any development efforts. You won't take care of health, you won't take care of education, because we have inherited a system that was completely broken in every manner, in all sectors. Now, that is what we want to avoid. And if we want to avoid a repeat of that, it means we need to conduct an inquest into how we got to this position in the first place, to help us put in place mechanisms to prevent it from happening again. I think that is a worthy investment.
It has already been over a year, and the only appointee of the TRRC is the chairman, Baba Gale Jallow. The victims of the former regime have been waiting for years to find closure. So why has it taken this long? And when will the victim have justice? Because you told me you visited other countries like South Africa and Sierra Leone. Yeah. So when will they have justice? Yeah.
Again, the issue of the impatience and the closure for the victims is very understandable. But we want to establish processes here. It's not just a question of putting in place, identifying people and putting in place, finding a location and putting them there and say, here you are. The issue of truth commissions are very complex around the world. These processes are not really quick fixes. They do take time to set up. And we have our own challenges here in this country. We have resource challenges. That is the truth. The government is doing all it can, and I make this comment taking note of the purported statement by Kijera, my very good brother of the Victim Center, and I saw his comments. But I can assure him that the government of the Gambia is doing everything it can to devote resources to this process. We are overwhelmed by the different priority needs of this country. I think the healthcare system of this country, you will all agree, is an absolute priority. I think the agricultural sector, the educational sector, because the foundation of all sectors is in dire need of our attention. So these are all competing priorities for the government. And our Truth Commission process is on track. There has been delay, certainly. We have to acknowledge that. But these setbacks should not be seen as failure. They should be seen as an opportunity for lessons learned. But we are making progress. We have appointed Dr. Babagale Jallo, a committed Gambian diaspora, from the diaspora to come down and help. We're very grateful for his willingness to assist us in this regard. We had issues of delay regarding the funding for the selection process in the regional areas. We have got the funding now, but however, we got the funding at a time when the Ramadan is starting. And given the inclusive and consultative nature of this regional selection process, we thought doing it during Ramadan would not be the best time. So we've decided to suspend the regional selection process until after Ramadan, and then the process will start. The money is now available, and we hope that that will be concluded quickly. The members of the commission will be identified immediately after that is done. They will be appointed and sworn in, by which time we would have also prepared the location where the commission will start, where in the interim doing the things that we should do to have them in place before the commissioners are ultimately appointed. For instance, we are working with third parties to ensure that there is a witness and victim support section which should be established. There is a witness protection section. We are looking at advertising positions very soon in the next few weeks for certain key positions that need to be in place. For instance, the IT section, the head of research and investigations. So those are all things that need to be in place. We have secured funds from the Dutch embassy in Dakar, the embassy of the Netherlands in Dakar, to conduct training for journalists who will be accredited to the Truth Commission, because their role is absolutely key. The message that they send out from the proceedings is key. They need to be trained about the sensitivities of reporting on Truth Commission proceedings. So the funds have been secured. The first phase of that training will happen pretty soon. Again, I think immediately after Ramadan. So we are trying to prepare a whole set of relevant sectors, stakeholders in this process, so that when we start the Truth Commission proceedings, there will still be challenges, but we won't have as many challenges as perhaps we would have had if we weren't prepared enough.
Who is funding the TRRC and how much will it cost?
The government of the Gambia and third parties who are donating to the government, including primarily so far the United Nations, the Peace Building Commission and the Peace Building Support Office. And I take this opportunity to thank them for the assistance that they are giving us. And they're doing so through the UNDP office here in the Gambia. And I also take this opportunity to thank the UNDP staff for all the assistance that they've been giving to us in this process. So it's a combination of donations, not donations, it's a combination of, well, yes, donations from third parties around the world, but also from government contribution. How much it will cost? Well, in terms of the operational cost for the Truth Commission, we have estimated that the 2 years, considering that it may also be extended further, but the 2 years will cost about $20 million US, and we have estimated that about $30 million US will be needed to adequately cater for the reparations that we have in mind for all the victims in this country. Now, that is what is on paper. However, the reality is we can only work with what we have. We have made a request. We will work with what we have, but we want to ensure that the process is well done, that it runs smoothly. We want to make sure that all the facilities needed to have a fully functional Truth Commission is in place over the next 2 years. But we also want to make sure that the victims are adequately compensated for the pain and suffering that they have gone through over the past 22 years.
Most Gambians express frustrations that some of those who allegedly aided Jammeh to victimize Jammeh are still serving in the intelligence services and other security sectors, while the victims continue to suffer.
It is certainly a legitimate concern, but we are involved in a reform process that includes reform of our security sector. That is a process that is also ongoing. Let us remember that we have been at pains over the past 22 years criticizing Jammeh and his governments for not following the due process of law in their dealings with Gambians. This is a time for us to reflect on those criticisms and for us to take the lead in ensuring that when we do things, we do them through established processes and procedures with transparency and openness. We have to be mindful that in our quest for justice, that we do not create a new class of victims in this process. Otherwise, we will risk creating a vicious cycle of victimization that will undermine durable peace in this country. We have had enough victims in this country. So we are involved in a process that will be transparent, that is systematic, that is methodical, to ensure that ultimately those who should not be or should no longer play a part in our in public offices cannot do so. But we have to establish the process by which that is, that will be done. We can't just jump on the basis of assumptions and rumors and speculations and start finger pointing and pinpointing people and getting them out of their work. That will be unfair. Remember, we're also dealing with justice here. It's justice for everyone, not just for the victims, but justice for potential victims. We do not want to create a new class of victims in this process.
Many said you do not take the TRRC seriously because neither you nor your family was a direct victim of Jammeh's repression.
Well, I guess people are entitled to their views, but I have personally had a track record of being a human rights advocate in this country well before I left to work outside the country. I think those that I have worked with, particularly the lawyers and those in the human rights field, in those days, before all of these new champions of democracy and human rights got involved in the struggle, I have been here in this country, being at the forefront of the legal fight against impunity and against the human rights abuses that were ongoing. So my commitment is really a matter of record. Everybody can refer to the past on that score. Now, the fact that I am not a victim does not lessen my commitment. I don't think commitment is exclusively based on victimhood. I think we have to be objective about these things. We have to have a wider understanding of these things. And I don't know the basis for anyone questioning my serious commitment to establishing the Truth Commission. I can only work within the means available to me. If I don't have those resources, I can't do much. I can't make much progress. But again, I have to say it's part of holding public office. Not everyone will agree with you, but it is part of our new democratic dispensation. People are free to express their opinion. At least they can do that now. In the past, they couldn't. Yeah. So this in itself is progress, I have to say.
A few months ago, there was a disagreement in Parliament. And the Speaker asked the member for Serekunda to be removed from the House. Does the Speaker have the right or powers to eject an elected member from the National Assembly?
The Speaker knows what is required of her under the law, and we have to assume that by doing so, the Speaker exercises her right until the contrary is proven or shown. I do not want to venture into the domain of another branch of the state. I represent the executive. I am granting this interview in my capacity as a member of government, not as a member of the National Assembly. But I think that matter has now been resolved. I think the Speaker gets on very well with the member for Serekunda Central. I have been in the National Assembly before, and I have seen their interaction. That notwithstanding, disagreements will always occur. Even within cabinet, we disagree among ourselves on issues, and that is normal. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in a democratic environment. I'm sure you disagree with some of your colleagues in the journalism field. Disagreements are a normal way. It's a normal way of life in a democracy.
Okay, another issue was the Minister of Health, Safilo Cisse. She made a statement which did not go down well with the doctors, and they embarked on strikes. And there was phase 1 of the strike and phase 2. Are the doctors within their rights to go on strike over the issue?
I will start with my opinion on this matter. I believe what the doctors did, even if they had genuine grievances against what the minister had said, I believe their course of action was disproportionate to the comments made by the minister. We have to be thoughtful, mindful of our responsibilities, and whatever action we take in consequence of whatever is said or done to us, we have to be measured. We have to be proportionate. And I think abandoning their responsibility to take care of the sick, including those who are on their dying beds, I think is an abdication of responsibility that cannot be justified under any circumstance. So I personally think that the reaction of the doctors was disproportionate to the statement made by the Honorable Minister. Having said that, they are a group of professionals, they are entitled to their views, to their opinion, and they are entitled to express those views. However, it is the manner of that expression which I disagreed with. I think they should have engaged with the Honorable Minister, and I believe that the Office of the President and the Office of the Vice President had reached out to them to engage them on these discussions. And it was disappointing initially that despite those engagements, they didn't stop the so-called strike, because I wouldn't say strike, I would say so-called strike, because I am not sure whether under their terms of employment and under their and given their status as public officers, they were entitled to embark on such a strike. That notwithstanding, I think the matter is now resolved. I think we have all learned appropriate lessons from this, and we will close that chapter and move forward. Omar, let me say one thing across the board. And I hear and see a lot of strikes, people protesting, which is fine. Our democracy is not going to graduate from perhaps the most basic aspects of it, following an extremely painful dictatorship, to perhaps the most advanced democracies in the world. It's not going to happen overnight. Ours is an evolutionary process, and it will be tested again and again and again. But that is what will make it resilient. Our intention, our objective as a government is to establish a very resilient architecture of governance founded strongly upon democratic values, fundamental freedoms, and respect for the rule of law. Now, in order to have that resilient architecture, we will be tested again and again and again. But every time we fail, as I said, that failure should not be seen, every time there is a setback, it should not be seen as a failure. It should be seen as an opportunity for another lesson learned in our democratization process, which will evolve, I have to say. It's only been a year and a half ago, and let us remember that just over a year ago, we had thousands of Gambians fleeing the Gambia, flocking neighboring countries to escape an imminent outbreak of violent conflict in this country. That is the context where we are coming from. And over the past 1 year, we've been able, as a government, to sustain the peace in this country because it is a priority. Without peace, we cannot achieve anything. So sustaining the peace is an important part of it. But also, our democracy will evolve. So these protests by the different sectors that I am observing is a double-edged sword. It's a welcome development. It's a breath of fresh air because it reiterates the fact that the Gambia is evolving as a democracy. But on the other hand, I think we should also be conscious of the fact that our democracy is still young, it's still fragile, it's still new. We are in the process of rebuilding, and it will take time for us to get perhaps to the level of the most advanced democracies who've had hundreds of years and they are still struggling to perfect their own democracies.
A couple of months ago, between 36 to 45 Gambians were deported from the United States. And reports have it that others were also deported from Europe. Is the Justice Department involved or informed about these deportations?
Yes, indeed. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Justice are working very closely on these issues. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs certainly is taking the lead because it is responsible for Gambians abroad. But the Justice Ministry is being consulted in every step of this process. We're working as a government and we're working as a team, as I said, between the Ministry of Justice, Interior and Foreign Affairs.
Okay, have you been in touch with the deportees to make sure that their rights have not been violated and all the legal avenues for them to regularize their status have been exhausted?
Well, as I said, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is taking the lead and they pass on information to us, and if there is a need for legal advice, we give that legal advice. So far, we have not yet been requested to provide legal advice in terms of the individual rights of each of the deportees.
Now, moving into the contract issue, your ministry is the government legal representative. This means that you get to advise all contracts signed on behalf of the Gambian people. There has been a lot of talk in the media about a couple of deals allegedly signed by the government, but the government has been quiet. What could you tell us about the contract of biometric ID cards allegedly signed by Semlex? Was it rescinded as reported in some media, in some quarters rather?
No, categorically the contract with Semlex has not been rescinded. And it's unfortunate that there has been a lot of talk about this, and I no longer even want to talk about it because it is the responsibility of the Ministry of Interior. However, we have a role to play, we have a part to play, that is the Ministry of Justice. And we give advice to the government, and we have given our advice to the government. The advice was accepted by Cabinet, and they have now moved on. But to really recap for the benefit of your audience, the government has done everything it could under the circumstances to make sure that there is a fair and transparent process. And cognizant of the fact that another Gambian company called Pristine was involved in this exercise, it has taken the government almost a year to arrive at this decision and to establish a task force, a ministerial task force at the highest level, which included myself, the Minister of Communication, Demba Jao, and the Minister of Finance, Amadou Sane, who chaired the task force. Again, it shows the seriousness with which the government took this matter, simply because there was another Gambian company that was involved, and we wanted to give them an opportunity. However, having regard to all the circumstances, in the end, we thought the best decision in the interest of this country is to honor the contract that had already been signed by the previous government with Semlex. Otherwise, we face the risk of international arbitration, which is already eating into so much of our purse, of our public purse, monies that could have gone to the health sector, to agriculture, to education, to my ministry to help set up this truth commission that the victims are impatient about. We're spending millions and millions of dollars and pounds on these international arbitration processes. And these are monies that could have gone to help us here in the Gambia. And we do not want to add to this burden. Okay. And so we decided to honor the contract with Semlex. And because Pristine did not have a contract, their contract had elapsed. Okay. We didn't agree with their view that the contract that they signed with the Ministry of Health for the production of e-birth certificates was an extension of the contract with the Minister of Interior for the production of ID cards. We've had to issue 3 separate legal opinions on this matter, and they all concluded unanimously on the same on the same facts. So really, this is all part of legacy issues that Jammeh unfortunately has left behind for us to deal with. They are difficult questions, they are difficult decisions, but they are decisions that nevertheless have to be taken. And as a responsible government, we will make the decisions that that we believe are in the best interest of this country.
Well, one might say Pristine being a Gambian company, giving them the contract will be a sign of encouragement. It will create employment for people, and the money will remain here. So my question is, what significant advantage did the international company, that is Pristine, have over...
You mean Semlex?
Yes, Semlex have over Pristine.
Well, to be quite honest, I think all things being equal, we are not dealing with a case here where we either had to choose Pristine or Semlex.
Okay.
And they were not on an equal footing, so to speak. We're dealing in a case where there was already an existing contract with this international company. And it was a question of either honoring that contract without any consequences for the government and giving it to Pristine, which is a Gambian company, and certainly, of course, there are lots of advantages to that, or not honoring that contract, giving it to Pristine and facing a huge arbitration legal bill, which comes from the public purse. Those were the difficult decisions that one had to make. And we, again, didn't just decide out of the blue. I had to commission 3 legal opinions. There was one that was issued in August or September 2016. That was before this government came into office. We put that aside. We commissioned another opinion, which was written by 3 senior state counsel with the assistance of another lawyer from the International Senior Lawyers Project. And they concluded and concurred with the opinion that was first issued in 2016. I didn't stop there. I commissioned a 3rd review. And that 3rd review also concluded on the same facts. And so really we didn't have an option. It was either we honor the contract with Semlex or we face international arbitration. Let me just add that it's not only a question of facing arbitration. I don't mind facing arbitration so long as I have a strong case. But if I have a weak case, it would be irresponsible to go to arbitration knowing that it will incur a lot of costs, and then you will lose the case and you will pay an award, you will pay damages as award. But if we believe that we have a case, as we do in the case of Africa Petroleum, we will defend the Gambia's interests, because that is what we should do. But so going to arbitration or not is not the ultimate determinant. The ultimate determinant is our chances of success.
Finally, what will be your final message? I've taken too much of your time.
No, it's okay. I think it is good to discuss these things and shed light on them. And there are lots of issues to cover. But all I say is that the government is strongly committed to a new Gambia. The government is committed to its constitutional and legal reform processes, as we have demonstrated thus far by the significant milestones I have highlighted at the start of this interview. And that commitment is unwavering. We are more determined today than ever before to see to it that we leave a legacy for generations of Gambians. I see our role in this government as laying a strong foundation for generations of Gambians to come. It is the legacy that we will bequeath to Gambians of future generations that will determine our own legacy. So our effort is geared towards, again, establishing a strong foundation. In terms of the justice needs of the victims, I have said that the government is committed to ensuring justice, but justice for all classes of victims and not just for some. And the fact that we do not want to create a new class of victims. I will close this interview by referring to the statement of Robert Jackson, the U.S. attorney who gave an opening statement at the Nuremberg trial, the trial of the Nazi leaders in Germany following World War II. And he said that the record on which we judge these defendants today is the record on which history will judge us tomorrow. And I think this government is very much aware of that, and we want history to judge us favorably We want future Gambians, future generation of Gambians to inherit a functional, effective system of government founded upon respect for democracy, rule of law, and human rights. That is what we want.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Omar.
I have 2 phones. One with the 4G SIM card from Africell with the 4G network. The other 4G SIM card from another network. Let's do a speed test and see the difference. Wow, I'm getting full coverage from Africell with speeds of 69.68 megabytes per second. The other network, 3.35 megabytes. This is just proof that Africell has the widest coverage and the fastest speed. By far the fastest.
Hurry now and go replace your Africell SIM cards with the real 4G SIM card.
Where Africell goes, no one has the speed to follow.